I'm Amanda Midkiff, and this is the Locust Light Show, your gateway to creating potent plant magic in your everyday life. No matter where you are on your journey, I'm so glad you're here. It is springtime in the garden. Leaves are opening, buds are forming, and we are going to spend today exploring the garden and checking out the way the plants look at this stage of growth. As you're getting to know plants better and expanding your plant ID skills, perhaps some nascent botany skills, or even just hanging out with the plant skills, it's really nice to get to know the way the plants look at all stages of growth. This is nice, for your intuition, but it's also really helpful because then you'll be able to identify plants at different stages in different environments, and just generally helps to build your knowledge base. So let's check out the garden and snoop some growing plants. This is our rose bush. We have 3 Rosa rugosa bushes here at Locust Light. This rose bush is about 4 years old. Our largest one is, older than that. It's moved a few times with me. Roses are a really nice plant to follow through the seasons because they are they're a nice shrub, and so you can really see all the stages of growth happening very clearly. So here we can see the leaves are opening. And with roses, with all plants, but particularly with roses, there's a specific pattern with the way that the leaves open. And so you can notice that they're sort of fanning out, and you can actually notice the same leaf unfurling pattern in other plants in the Rosacea family, which includes lady's mantle, hawthorn, apple trees, cherries, plums, all that. So we're gonna see in a moment if there are still any unfurling leaves on the lady's mantle, because if there are, you'll be able to notice the same pattern. On our rose bush, we can also see new buds. So these buds, will form new branches in the future, tiny branches. And then we can also see the rose hips. These are last year's rose hips. I harvest most of the rose hips, but there's always some late ripeners, and I like to leave some on. I don't really think that the birds eat them because they're still here, but I still like to leave some on the plant. So these are last year's rose hips. They're completely hardened, desiccated. Here's a little spider crawling around, and they will just stay there. We're not going to use these rose hips anymore. But it's nice to see all of the cycles of life here on the rose bush. This is our nettle patch. As you can see, the nettle patch extends in a nice wide arc, and I planted the nettles here because this is one of the more wet areas of the garden. Nettles like to grow in mucky, nitrogen-rich areas, like perhaps close to a brook or a creek. We have a little vernal pool over here. They also like to grow at the edges of compost piles, and if you have a nettle patch, they like extra compost. So these nettles actually just continue to grow towards the vernal pool, and if I didn't have to mow the pathway in between, they probably would just take over this whole area. So these are our beautiful, beautiful spring nettles, very fresh. I usually don't harvest these nettles until they about double in height, so maybe they get, 18 to 24 inches tall, and then I'll harvest the top third to half, depending on the plant. Nettles, of course, are really one of the stars of the spring herbs. They're an extremely nutritive tonic, very beneficial in many ways. I will just like to say to you, if you are going to forage your own nettles, you really want to make sure that the area you're foraging them from is not sprayed at all. This is often early enough in the year that people aren't spraying herbicides, but people do spray, like townships and municipalities and parks will sometimes spray for mosquitoes early in the spring. And because nettles like to grow in wet areas, they're, I would say, at risk of being contaminated with whatever it is that people spray for mosquitoes. So just be aware of that, and just make sure you're harvesting your nettles from a safe place. This is our Motherwort patch. Motherwort is Leonoris cardiaca, an herb that is, native to Europe and naturalized here. Grows very well as a perennial, and it's exciting to have in a perennial garden because it's one of the first herbs that really begins to come back in the spring here in the Mid-Atlantic. And so Motherwort is an herb that we have already pruned back the stems of the Motherwort. The stems are nice and tall, and they're hollow, which means they're a nice habitat for insects. And I wait until we have a series of really warm days and until I notice that other insects are out and about flying before I prune any hollow stems from the plants. That, in my mind at least, gives a chance for any insect eggs that are in there to hatch. So we've pruned the stems from the Motherwort, it's coming back, and I'm actually, now that I'm crouching here, I'm noticing what I'm gonna guess is like a disease on these Motherwort leaves that I didn't notice even on, a few days ago. So I need to investigate that. This is second year Motherwort here. So I'll need to look into that, see what's going on with the Motherwort. Yeah, it's always, there's always a lot of unknowns in a garden and a lot of things to learn, explore, and get to know. And you might think that you're just getting into this to learn about plants, but then you end up learning a lot about, fungal diseases, viruses, bacteria, insect life cycles, things like that. Always more to learn. These are two of our ladies' mantle plants. They're, about 5 years old now, so they're getting a little raggedy, but they're still quite beautiful. You can see that the plants have collected the dew and are even extruding liquid along the tips of the leaves. And that liquid is a liquid that was collected by alchemists and used in their alchemical practice. And that gives ladies' mantle its Latin name, Alchemilla vulgaris, which translates to little alchemy or little magic of the people. But the one thing I wanted to point out with ladies' mantle here is that most of the leaves have opened, but some of them are still in that unfurling stage enough that you can see the same pattern that you saw with the rose leaves. So that's just a nice thing to notice, look at, and fondly admire. This is a burgeoning clump of goldenrod. And goldenrod is a plant that we tend to associate with the autumn because it blooms here in September and it's showy and gorgeous. But it's very important to recognize what goldenrod looks like as a leaf, because goldenrod is an extremely, extremely important plant for our ecosystem here in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. Goldenrod, along with asters, are plants that support upwards of 200 species of moths and butterflies. So they are larval host plants for moths and butterflies. And what that means is that the larvae of those specific moths and butterfly species are able to eat the goldenrod leaves so that they can mature into an adult moth and butterfly. And this larval host relationship is extremely important in our ecosystem. If we do not have enough larval host plants, then we will not have enough moths and butterflies, and then we will not have enough birds, etc. It's one of the foundations of our ecosystem here. And so one of the best things that you can do if you have any plot of land, no matter how large, in the Mid-Atlantic or Northeast, is to simply recognize what goldenrod and aster leaves look like when they're young and just not mow or weed whack them and just let them grow. Goldenrod and asters are very hard to tell apart until they bloom. That's fine. They're both great plants. And goldenrod and some types of asters are amazing herbal medicine. Goldenrod is extremely high in antioxidants. It's high in lutein. It's very helpful for our kidneys, our urinary tract. It's just, it's a stellar herb. It can be used as a wound healer for sprains. It's really lovely in tea. So you, as an herbal enthusiast, can just simply learn to recognize what goldenrod leaves look like and scan for them in your environment so that you can help to protect those plants as they grow. So we'll have a little look at goldenrod, maybe do some Googling, get an image of the leaf, and then just be on the lookout. See if you can find it somewhere in your environment. This is our Clary Sage patch here in the garden, and as you can tell, I have not started weeding the garden yet. So last week was spent finishing, cutting down stalks like this one, And then it was really wet, and I don't like to disturb the soil when it's that wet and cold. So we have not started weeding yet. Most of the weeds are chickweed, which simply can be eaten. And then, you know, some other plants, but Clary Sage in a weedy patch. Now, I'm on a whole story arc here with the Clary Sage, and so I want to tell you about it so that you can understand how you can have a garden without knowing everything. So I had planted Clary Sage a few different times, but Clary Sage is a biennial, which means in year 1, the leaves stay close to the ground and form a circular shape called a basal rosette. In year 1, the leaves are very fragrant, and that's what we use medicinally. In year 2, the leaves start to grow vertically. The plant grows from being maybe this big to like this big, vertically, and flowers and blooms, and it's extraordinary. So because of just the way my gardening farming life has been, I had never seen Clary Sage bloom before. So last year in 2020, it was the first time I had ever seen Clary Sage bloom. And not only had I not seen it bloom, but I didn't even like look up what it would look like blooming, because I wanted to be surprised. You know, I wanted to be along for the ride. I didn't want to have to know what it was going to look like ahead of time. So see, these plants are small. I thought the blooms would be maybe this big. I had no idea that the plants were going to become this big, like the size of me squatting. So that was an extraordinary surprise. I let them go to seed so that they would reseed themselves in the garden. Little did I know they reseeded themselves that fall. And so then, again, with me not knowing, I was just wondering, okay, so does that mean that that's year 1 and this is year 2, or then will this spring be year 1? So what I'm now discerning is that we are in fact on year 2, and my thinking is that all of these plants are going to bloom this year. And I've discerned that because the leaves are actually not that fragrant, which means that if I want fragrant Clary Sage leaves this spring, which I do, I'll need to purchase seedlings from a nursery to get those nice fragrant leaves, which I will do. And then these are going to go to flower, and so this will just be like the most amazing area in probably, I don't know, 6 to 8 weeks. I do need to thin them out. You know, I need to remove some because, like I said, so there's like 3 plants in this space. Probably only 1 plant can fit here, and because Clary Sage is one of my favorite plants, I have avoided thinning them out. But I will need to do that, and that's, you know, one of the woes of gardening is that you do sometimes need to thin out your plants. But it's exciting to be on this journey with a plant and, you know, not know exactly how it's going to go and just learn by experience rather than trying to read about it all or ask someone all ahead of time. Certainly reading and asking people for knowledge is important, but sometimes you can just learn by experience, and then, you know, when we learn that way, like being on a journey with this plant, it just sinks into your heart more, you remember it more easily, and then the knowledge that you gain is, it's embedded within your own life story, and then you can hold it more deeply within yourself. And so that's been my journey with the Clary Sage, and I hope that you're able to have some of your own plant mysteries in your own gardening experience. All right, my friend, that has been our spring garden tour here in the Locust Light Garden. I hope that you are able to get outside, snoop some plants, find some leaves growing. And I want you to remember that the earth and the seedlings and the wormy-worms and the Clary Sage and the chickweed all loves you, and that you belong here.